Yo, what's going on, y'all? It's Cone back here again today with another video, and today I want to talk about one of the most interesting teams in the entire league going into next season, and that is the San Antonio Spurs. Now, if you knew nothing about them and just took a look at their record, you were a super casual fan, you might say to yourself, why would you be excited about this team? They went 22-60 both of the past two seasons, and that's the worst two records they've had in the past 25 years. So it hasn't been the most prosperous couple of seasons in Spurs history. In fact, it's been the least prosperous. But of course, there's a lot more to them than just that record. The biggest plus from these 2 years was that they got perhaps the greatest prospect of all time in Victor Wembanyama. And last season, he had one of the most insane rookie seasons I've ever watched with my own two eyes. Statistically, put up 21.4 points per game, 10.6 boards, 3.9 dimes, 1.2 steals, and 3.6 blocks, which led the NBA and is the third most ever by a rookie, behind only Manute Bol and David Robinson, another Spurs big man. Not to mention, he got way better as the season went on last year, becoming more efficient from three, finding his right level of aggression, when to attack, when to defer. He leveled up as a playmaker, somehow got better as a defender as the year went on, which led to him finishing second in Defensive Player of the Year voting, only behind one of the greatest rim protectors of all time in Rudy Gobert. In his rookie season, despite being on a team that was horrific defensively, that's how impactful he was as an individual. Not to mention, he dropped a 5x5, the first since Nurkic did it. I believe that was in 2019, and was just a single assist away from doing that on literal back-to-back nights, back-to-back games. Of course, unanimous Rookie of the Year. That's not surprising at all. And there's a lot of people that would tell you he should have won DPOY. I know a lot of people that think he should have been on an All-NBA team, or at least were making the case for him to do so. And he did all of this despite being on the team without a true floor general, someone to get him the ball. I know I experienced this watching a ton of Spurs games. I'm sure if you did, you felt the same way. Intense frustration every time Wemby would get down low and nobody could throw him an entry pass. They would turn the ball over. They would just look away from him. So many times we're in transition. If he just had a more competent group of playmakers around him, it's so easy to get Wemby the ball. He's 7'4". Just literally throw it as high as you can and he's going to get it, but without much consistent NBA level play from a lot of his teammates, many of whom are young and can still get a lot better. It just was not a great squad around Wemby, yet he still went on to put together one of the most, again, insane rookie seasons I've ever watched. So that, of course, is a massive plus in its own right, but not to mention, the Spurs had a pretty good offseason, which really is the key to why I think they're going to be so much fun to watch this upcoming season. Their first move was drafting Stephon Castle out of Connecticut, a 19-year-old guard who has really interesting size. He's 6'5", has some interesting ball skills, wants to be a point guard, he's got a long wingspan, a really exciting player, someone that was really high on a lot of people's draft boards. Makes sense why they took him 4th overall, and this was a pretty widely mocked selection. I think everybody knew the Spurs were probably going to go after Stephon Castle. They need guard play, and he was consensus one of the top 2 guards in the draft. Then they got involved in the DeMar DeRozan to the Kings trade by taking on Harrison Barnes' contract. Now, Harrison Barnes isn't great anymore. This past season was one of his worst in quite some time, but I still think he can be productive. The Spurs aren't exactly a championship contender right now, so they don't need him to really pick up the slack. If anything, he's just a big improvement to that team's starting lineup. I would imagine he starts for that squad, and he's an actual threat out there from the three-point line. He has been a double-digit scorer for a long time. He can just open up the game for Wemby and the rest of the young guys, gives them a veteran in a locker room, a pickup that I actually really like. I like when rebuilding teams get involved in these big trades. They help facilitate things. That's how, like, the Cavaliers picked up Jared Allen, who is now just recently signed a long-term extension and has been an all-star big for them. So I like the Spurs going in on this deal and grabbing a veteran that can help improve them in the moment. But easily my favorite move of this offseason for them was signing Chris Paul. This is the big one. They picked him up on a 1-year, I believe it was around $11 million deal. Chris Paul had a pretty rough season for Golden State, only played 58 games, most of those were off the bench. It was his lowest point per game total of his career, and it led to him not having a ton of suitors in the trade market because they would have had to take on his big-time contract. But once he got waived, there was a wave of interest, and the Spurs were the team that go ahead and pick him up because they give him opportunity, a chance to maybe have one of those prove it seasons we've seen from Chris Paul at times, like I think to, of course, being a Thunder fan, the one where he was in Oklahoma City where it felt like he might be on the way out a little bit. The Rockets went ahead and traded him alongside 4 first-round picks to get Russell Westbrook, and then CP3 went on to be an All-NBA player. I don't think we're going to see quite that this season, but I think as a starter and given a lot of opportunity, he can be a big part in helping the Spurs kind of change the culture, take that next step forward, and really help facilitate the growth of their youth. Specifically, of course, everybody, me included, are extremely excited about how he's going to play off of Victor Wembanyama. Like I mentioned earlier, the Spurs did not have great playmaking at all this past season. They were trying to run Jeremy Sochan at the PG spot for a lot of the year, and it was clear to anybody watching that that is just not a natural fit for Sochan. Maybe he develops a bit more into that point forward as time goes on. Maybe this past season's reps will be big for him. He had some solid moments, but clearly not a point guard. Trey Jones was pretty solid, but had inconsistent play time, and he's still far from perfect. And outside of like him, the playmaking was extremely rough across the board. Like Devin Vassell has some solid moments, as well as a number of guys on the roster, but they really needed that floor general. Chris Paul is one of the best point guards ever, one of the best playmakers, floor generals in the history of the game, and he's going to make such a massive difference for not just this whole team, but specifically Victor Wembanyama. Whether it's running the pick and roll, a guy that can actually probably throw him a competent lob up there. I mean, years of playing with Blake Griffin, Wemby is the easiest target in the world. All he has to do is be within like 5 feet of the rim, and he can go ahead and slam it down. Or if you somehow even throw it too high for Wemby or too off target, he can come down with it and, oh, he's 7'4", so he can literally just put it up and in over basically any player in the NBA, unless it's someone else that's close to his height, which is rare in the league. He can actually have someone who can hit him in transition. The amount of times where Wemby would be running down the court, or he would leak out early like he'd be out in the three-point line, he would have contested a three, probably almost blocked it knowing Wemby, and he's streaking down the court. There's like one guy, maybe a guard or a wing, it doesn't matter who's guarding Wemby in transition, and they just would not get him the ball. They wouldn't look up with it. They wouldn't have the ability to hit, again, one of the most easily findable targets in the history of the sport. It just wasn't happening, so now he's actually going to have somebody that can hit him in those spots, throwing good entry passes into the post. That was a massive problem that a lot of people complained about on NBA Twitter and NBA media as a whole last season, and just generally can be a mentor for Wemby, help him improve his game and additionally, one of the best basketball minds that has ever played the sport. I think adding Chris Paul alone is going to make Wemby so much more terrifying as an offensive force next season, and that's on top of the natural development you're going to see from Wemby. You're going to see a lot of that coming off of him playing in the Olympics right now. We know a lot of players get that international play boost, whether it was like Lauri Markkanen coming off of the Euro Ball, whether it was like Shea coming to this past season after playing the World Cup for Canada and being one of the best players. We've seen a number of times where players will come in after playing internationally, they'll be in good shape, they'll kind of ride that momentum and have the best season of their careers or just an amazing year. Wemby, of course, is far from the best years of his career, but this year too, in addition to his general development, the stuff we saw in the second half of this past season, the fact that he's one of the greatest prospects of all time, now he plays next to a real playmaker in Chris Paul. Wouldn't shock me at all if Wemby's out there dropping at least 25 points per game next season. I could see as high as like 26 or 27, to be honest. On very solid efficiency, he's going to put up a number of 30 pieces. I believe he had one 40-point game this past season. I think he has a lot more this year, and that's on top of the defensive impact. I mean, it's going to be insane watching Wemby this upcoming year, not to mention down the line, as I'm sure Chris Paul's going to give him a lot of tips, a lot of tricks that he can really use later on into his NBA career. And of course, this is also good for other young guys like Trey Jones, who's only 24 years old, Devin Vassell, Jeremy Sochan, and specifically, I'm excited about Stephon Castle. Reports came out around the time of the draft that Stephon Castle wanted to be taken by a team that didn't have an established point guard, that's the role he wanted to play from day one. And with Chris Paul coming into the fold after the draft, that's not going to be the case. Chris Paul is going to be that lead playmaker. But I think this is still a perfect spot for Stephon Castle to land, because if you're not going to be the lead guy from day one, and he's still going to get plenty of reps, it's best that you learn under a Hall of Fame point guard like CP3. He's going to have a chance to take a lot away from him, pick his brain, and I know some people draft-wise that were a bit concerned that Stephon Castle may not specifically pan out as that lead playmaker, that point guard throughout his NBA career. Maybe he's a bit more of a wing, a tweener type of guy, but I think playing along Chris Paul gives him the best chance to find that success down the line. Of course, it's not a guarantee, but I think there's a world where eventually we look forward a decade and Stephon Castle has become this great point guard. He's having a great career. He and Wemby are this dynamic duo, and we think back to when Chris Paul was able to mentor him as one of the key moments in his development. Of course, he's got just a ton of natural talent as well, but I think this could help. Similar probably to what happened with Chris Paul and Shea. Again, I'm referencing the Thunder, I always seem to, but I think that year was probably big for Shea. I think he learned a lot playing alongside Chris Paul. Obviously not the reason solely why he is now an MVP level player, but I do think it is something that helped. Playing alongside that veteran and that legend was probably big for him, similar to the way I think it could be big for Stephon Castle, even though I don't think Stephon Castle is eventually going to become an MVP level guy. So yeah, there's a lot of reasons to be really excited about where the Spurs can go this season, and that's on top of the development we're going to see from Devin Vassell, who was a big-time bucket getter this past season, had a great year, and having a playmaker like CP3, Wemby being more and more of a dominant force is only going to open up the game for him. I'm excited to see what Sochan can do in this upcoming season. Keldon Johnson, of course, can't forget about him. Still a really exciting player, as well as a number of the young guys on this roster. The Spurs are just extremely exciting, and with Harrison Barnes' contract and a bunch of draft picks in the future, they're also a contender to make a trade. I don't think it comes throughout this season, but going into next summer, I would not be surprised if the Spurs are towards the front of the line when a superstar becomes available to try and pair them alongside Victor Wembanyama. So there's just a lot of exciting stuff going on with the Spurs. This right now feels like ground zero for what is eventually going to become one of the most terrifying forces in the Western Conference. I don't think they end up all that scary this season. I believe they'll probably be right around like the 13th seed. They're not going to be a play-in team if you ask me. I definitely don't think they are a playoff team. I just don't think they're quite ready yet. Although Wemby feels like he's on the verge of all NBA superstardom. Maybe it comes this season and all of a sudden, hey, he's a top 10 player, just wills them to at least a play-in spot. Honestly, would it be the craziest thing in the world? Could just break everything. But I think more realistically, they're going to be around a 13 seed, but a team that's a lot more threatening than they were any of the past two seasons. A squad that can beat you on any night because of Wemby, because of the growing young talent, because of the addition of CP3 and Harrison Barnes. This is ground zero. This is just the beginning for them. Wemby's only getting better and better, and as he gets more help, it's only a matter of time until the Spurs are again a staple at the top of the Western Conference. They're rattling off 50-win season after 50-win season after top 3 seed, top 4 seed, whatever, and they're working towards adding more rings to their collection. The West and the NBA as a whole needs to go ahead and find success ASAP, because the way the Spurs are building this thing, it's not going to be too long before this could be one of the new modern dynasties. Wouldn't surprise me at all. But yeah, shout out to the Spurs. I like a lot of what they've done, and this is a squad that I imagine will be on national TV a lot because of Wemby, but even if they're not, if they're just on League Pass, I'm going to be watching as many Spurs games as possible, because that way when they're destroying the league in like 5 to 10 years, I can look back on this moment and say, okay, that's where it all started. So with that being said, those are my thoughts on the San Antonio Spurs for the upcoming season. Let me know down below what you think Wemby does this upcoming year. Did you like the Chris Paul signing? Are you not that big of a fan of it? What like star level players would you keep an eye on if you're the Spurs to potentially trade for at some point? Are there any superstar names that you can think of that maybe are interesting to pair next to Wemby down the line if they do end up making a deal? Maybe like Steph Curry gets unhappy in Golden State at some point. He wants to compete for a ring elsewhere. That's just something randomly that came to mind. But I don't know. Would be interesting to see him play alongside Wemby at some point. But yeah, appreciate you all watching as always. Leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on future videos. Let me know what other teams and concepts you want me to break down before the season. We have a lot of time before that. So yeah, love to hear your suggestions. Appreciate watching again. I'll see y'all later. Real one, say it back.